Hi there, this is Martin Baker, and this is Action Potential, which is a thing that I do now, because reasons. I'll be curating a selection of music and other material I feel relevant. Don't miss the haiku segments, they're now a permanent feature. So I hope this provides an eclectic and stimulating experience, and if you were to need any more context, I can refer you to episode 1. Although, as I'll be explaining in a bit, I don't think comprehension is always necessary. Interesting developments regarding ideas this past week or so. I've had what feels like a long overdue week and a bit off. Enjoyed a great deal more activities than a typical week would entail for a lot of people over lockdown, but actually it's also a far cry from how my weeks were looking long prior to lockdown. Trying to maintain or indeed regenerate a stronger social life is a whole big matter in and of itself that I'd like to dive into some other time, as I'm sure that could resonate with lots of things. But for now, there is a film that recently came out, the reception of which leads me conveniently into where I seem to position myself creatively, really digging at the core of what matters to me and what I think I should do with that. So, as a modest birthday outing, we went to see Nolan's new film Tenet at the BFI IMAX. For those who don't know, Nolan is a very particular director when it comes to format. He's a big lover of using analogue film, making large-scale, ambitious action films with little to no CGI. And now is shooting exclusively with IMAX film cameras, with the preference to be projected in full 70mm IMAX format, the BFI being one of the few places that you can do that. So, right off the bat, I'm going to say that I really liked this film, for reasons that I think say a lot about my own creative outlook. and values. But personally, I recommend seeing it in the most immersive way possible. Now, some people may not recommend it, and it is my response to the common reservations that have been expressed so far, obviously without any spoilers, that is the crux of where I'm going with this. So, I've heard some suggest it's trying to be too clever, or that it's too confusing for its own good, and rather than me taking a snobbish stance and pretending I'm more highbrow, I'm going to admit that I didn't fully understand what was going on. I'm willing to bet that was somewhat deliberate, and it was that element of confusion that made me enjoy it that much more. Which I think raises an interesting matter about how much we need to fully comprehend art to enjoy it. Naturally, some people prefer a certain sort of certainty, and that's not just an individual preference, it could depend on your mood or personal needs at the time. We don't want to be challenged all the time, and we want some assurance that when something does demand a bit of working out, that it's going to pay off. Is it worth our bother? But the question of whether there is one deliberate fixed message or reason that this or that is working around or building to doesn't matter to me. In fact, sometimes what really matters to me is that it doesn't matter. I enjoy that process of working out an experience for myself, though it might provoke some common feelings collectively. We're a far cry from the visual communication of, say, graphic design, advertising, or politically charged material, where artists really would prefer that we all interpret precisely the same thing. There's a spectrum of how much we desire some simplicity or guidance, against the desire for a challenge to our senses. And by challenge, I don't mean triggering a fight or flight mechanism. That's where I think we often condition ourselves away from inquisitiveness, the appreciation for novel and stimulating encounters that's essential to adapt, to grow, fundamentally to thrive, as much as an individual as a society. This comparison of mechanisms has come up a lot when I've thought about why I'm fascinated now with health as much as I am with art. And I would keenly spin pretty much any political issue at its core as an issue of public health. Now, coming back to this film for a second, whether or not you enjoyed it, it sets out to be a novel experience. There are definitely noticeable tropes compared to his previous films, manipulating the whole depiction of time, of the passage of time, being the primary thing most people comment on. Now, time is a whole other matter I'd happily trail off about, but it is one of those things I think we tend to take a very rigid, dare I say, oppressive approach to in life. The point has been raised that this film was trying to be too clever. That presupposes that it either fails or succeeds at being clever. I don't think it was trying to be clever, I thought it was trying to be exciting. I could say I find the way it does this was quite clever, but the assumption that something is trying to be clever and that's what makes it flawed doesn't add up to me, because why would being clever be a good endgame in making a film? It's not a lecture on quantum physics. Nothing seems to warrant having a qualified view on the concept of time inversion to use it as an exciting storytelling device. I would assume from most of Nolan's work that he prefers a level of ambiguity himself when viewing his own work. I think ambiguity is a very inclusive thing, so long as the individual is willing to go with it, to fill or bypass the gaps of comprehension if such gaps occur. I'm unlikely to get much out of a lecture on quantum physics because I wouldn't be able to ride a wave of momentum off it. I'd have no way of knowing if I was missing some crucial information. What I like about a film like Tenet is that amongst all its fast-paced explanations, we're all taken on the same ride. We may process all of that differently, but that doesn't have to matter if you don't want it to. What I enjoy most in creativity is that fine balance between the familiar and the inexplicable, and that process varies on all sorts of variables. But the principal mechanism is universal: to successfully persuade the viewer, listener, subject or whatever to embrace a level of uncertainty. It's how I find patterns of persuasion work in communication, and it was a key component when I dabbled in NLP and therapy training a while back. You use the familiar as a device to invite the subject or subjects into something that could, at least initially, be beyond comprehension. It's also what makes funny comedy funny, I think, being the question of how much absurdity can we extract from the familiar. Often how this sort of stuff relates to personal tastes and moods can say a lot about how the individual likes to regulate their life, for worse or better. But where this train of thought leads into the matter of health, for me, is that our tastes and preferences are nowhere near as hardwired as we often assumed. Usually the prospect of doing something that might be good for us, whether that's good for us independently, collectively or both, there is an assumed anxiety of some inevitable pain or sacrifice with that. Putting aside our taste in film for one moment, I've tended to find, as someone who has obsessed in the past with trying to get fitter, stronger, smarter, more confident, the measures that ended up working in the end most, that made the most radical difference overall, required very little discomfort, and what challenges there were guaranteed an instant satisfaction however things played out. Bad things may happen, but that seems very much incidental to any effective process of making things better. Yet I sense a societal assumption that we must deviate far from our perceived comfort zones to obtain anything worthwhile, especially in the context of good health, well-being and all that jazz. I think that this has been a very common, very toxic fabrication that discourages well-being, discourages agency, and therefore cultivates anxiety, addiction and consumption. My initial analysis of that Tenet film got me thinking about what I feel like is a microcosm of this sensory mechanism I've been rambling about. It is the push-pull, stress recovery, yin-yang kind of thing we fluctuate between, the manner in which we may do determining how we experience new stimulus. And whether or not we agree that a single film is good, it was the debate around it that got me thinking deeper about themes I've been trying to wrap my head around in my own creative practice, what I feel like I value most in other people's work. It puts my previous themes of perceived, supposed binary mechanisms that surfaced from my MA dissertation into a bigger picture that explains all my interests and intentions a lot more clearly. Incidentally, my dissertation, which is now about 3 years old, is on my website somewhere, I think. Though, as I suggested, it is now 3 years more incoherent than this is. My reflections are a simple analytical inversion of time, and either which way, whatever that did or didn't mean to you, we have arrived here. Closing today with noteworthy haikus, with compilation of bicycles and dogs. 17th of March. Too tired to do much. Too bored to just do nothing. This weekend, chicken. Day 7 of lockdown haiku. I am the Matrix. I've uploaded my essence. Stand by for updates. 28th of March. Diazepam man. It pays to remember things, but not quite like that. 7th of April 2020. We have agency. We simply assess the scale. A cat told me this. 25th of April 2020. If a penis talked, what lesson could it teach us? Let's hope it just sings. Bye for now.